abused daily by her family, until a widowed farmer decided to take her away to. The wind didn't just rattle the Alvarez house, it tested it, fingering every crack, searching for a way in. Damp wood soured the air. Liquor fumes burned. 16-year-old Maria Alvarez counted floorboard squeaks the way prisoners count days. Amos Kane sprawled in his chair, a belt coiled on his thigh, eyes glassy with mean patience. Clara hovered at the stove, stirring nothing, saying less. A crooked nail over the doorway trembled with each gust like a metronome for fear. Maria kept her voice behind her teeth. If she didn't speak, maybe the storm would. Outside, a bucket scraped the yard. A horse blew steam. Something loose knocked against something stubborn. Amos laughed at the noise and at the silence afterward. Then he stood. The belt tipped, then settled. Wood box, he said. Maria moved, light on the boards, and saw on the window a damp smear shaped like 3 stacked stones. Her grandmother had stories about that sign, watch for it when no one sees you. A new sound threaded the wind, measured, deliberate. 3 knocks. The crooked nails steadied, listening. Amos turned. Clara's stirring stopped. Maria pressed her thumb to the pocket ribbon. Its frayed edge quieted her tremor. The door opened without an invitation. A man in a weathered coat stood there, storm feathering his hat brim. No gun, no smile, a ledger under one arm. A folded letter with Clara's name inked dark. Who sent that? Amos asked. Someone who remembers, the man said. Clara went white. Maria's heartbeat slowed everything. The rain ticks. The horse's breath. Paper whispering free. On the page was the 3-stone mark. You're late, the man told Amos. To Clara, softly, it's time. He lifted his eyes to Maria. Amos stepped forward, knuckles whitening. I'm here for the girl. What happened next will shock you. Dawn thinned the storm to a gray veil as a broad-shouldered man stepped through it, set his hat to his chest like he was laying a stone on a grave, and said, in a voice carved by wind and work, that his name was Jacob Holt, and he had come to talk wages. He did not glance at the belt lounging on the chair arm or at the bottle breathing sourness across the table. He looked at Amos Kane as if measuring a fence line that needed straightening. Clara stood by the stove with her hands wrapped in her apron, and Maria, still holding a damp rag, stayed close to the sink where the window showed only rain washing ruts into the yard. I'm a widower, Jacob said, steady and plain. I have 2 girls who need meals, clean clothes, and a firm, gentle hand. I have a house that needs tending and a ranch that won't run itself. I'm hiring for the inside and I pay fair. Amos snorted, half laugh, half warning. Fair for who? Jacob's brow made a small private adjustment that looked like patience choosing not to leave. Fair for the work done, he said. He reached into his coat and put 2 coins on the table, not as payment but as proof that he knew the difference between talk and trade. The coins sat in a ring of light like small moons on a black pond. Your girl knows a broom, Amos said, eyes sliding toward Maria. She knows how to take orders. I feed her. I keep a roof over her. He said the last as if the roof which leaked, and the food which skipped her plate more often than not, were favors. Jacob let the silence breathe long enough to be uncomfortable and then said, I'm offering work, room and meals with Sundays hers unless sickness or storm forces otherwise. I'll bring her back if it doesn't suit. She'll have a bed and a door she can close. The word door made a sound in Maria's chest like a latch catching. Amos leaned back, boots biting the floor, bottle shifting. What's a month worth to you? 15, Jacob said. And she eats like my own. Amos's gaze sharpened. 20. Jacob's eyes remained the same color as the morning, steady, pale, refusing drama. She's 16, he said. I'm not bargaining like I'm buying a mule. 15 and proper treatment. You think I don't treat her properly? Amos said, smiling without warmth. Jacob did not look away. I think your belt tells me enough. The belt's shadow made Clara flinch, and Maria fought the instinct to move between her mother and the chair. The rain ticked harder, then eased as if the sky too were deciding its next move. 17, Amos said, the smile gone, and I'll want a week in hand. 16, Jacob said, and I'll leave 2 days in advance. If it fails, I take the loss. Not her. Amos looked at the coins, then at the man who had placed them without showing hunger. His tongue touched a tooth, a habit he had when he wanted to spit but thought better of it. She doesn't wander off at night, he said. She does what she's told. Jacob turned his head toward Maria for the first time, and the attention was unlike anything she knew. It didn't dig. It didn't prod. It waited, as if the answer were hers to give and not a tool to be taken. Can you cook? He asked. She nodded. Clean? Another nod. Read? Some, she said, voice small but intact. I can learn. Good, he said. Most of what matters can be learned. Amos slapped his palm on the table, making the coins hop. 16 and 2 days, he said. And if she breaks anything, I'll hear of it and settle it. You'll hear of nothing from me except that she works. Or she doesn't. Jacob said. I'm not buying a complaint. I'm hiring a person. The word person wove itself into the steam above the sink and hung there like a new idea trying to take shape. Clara's mouth opened and closed. She should pack, she whispered. Amos glared, but the glare slid off her like rain off waxed canvas. Jacob set a folded paper near the coins. My address, he said. Holt Ranch. Willow Draw. If something changes, send word by Tom Brody, my foreman. He's in town on Thursday. He waited one breath longer, then added softer. We'll do right. The last was for Maria, and it did not sound like a promise men break when nobody watches. It sounded like a thing he already lived by. Maria gathered what she had. A threadbare shawl, 2 dresses, her grandmother's ribbon, a small tin of needles and a book with half its spine gone. She wrapped them in a flour sack and tied it with twine. Amos watched the bundle as if it were a sack of feed he had weighed and found light, then took the coins and the paper, slid the money into his pocket and left the paper where it lay. The door opened to a breath of cold so clean it hurt. Jacob led the way to a wagon with a canvas top and a bay gelding hitched, still and patient, despite the leftover thunder rolling like old barrels across distant hills. He helped Maria up without touching more than her elbow and set her bundle beside her boots. You'll ride under cover till the ridge, he said. After that the wind's worse if you don't face it. She nodded, not sure what facing it would look like. Clara came to the doorway, fingers white around the frame, and lifted one hand in a motion so small a sparrow might have missed it. Maria lifted hers back and held her mother with her eyes until the yard turned to a sheet of water, and the house blurred. They crossed the flats while rain teased the canvas and the wheels found every road. Jacob drove without talking, attention tuned to horse and road, reins resting on a competence that made noise unnecessary. When he did speak, it was to point with his chin at blackbirds rising from cattails, or to say hold while he climbed down to move a fallen branch, or to ask once warm enough. She said yes. He passed her a folded blanket anyway. The storm had a rhythm, and the land had another, and between the two her thoughts began to unwind from the tight coil they had lived in. Fences showed and vanished. Cottonwoods leaned like old men counting years. A hawk tilted over a gully and slid away toward lighter sky. Your girls, she said at last. How old? 8 and 6, he answered. Lila, the elder. Emma, the younger. Lila misses her mother with her jaw set. Emma misses with tears. Both miss different. Both honest. He did not apologize for the missing or hide from it. The plainness of his words felt like dry wood that would catch and burn true. They'll test you, he added. Not out of meanness, out of worry. The ground under them shifted. They want to know where the rock is. I can be steady, Maria said, surprising herself. I know how to hold a line. The wagon climbed a long slow grade that showed the valley like a book laid open. Far off a dark seam of pines stitched the horizon. Closer, pastures waited under the rain, and here and there roofs gathered water and let it fall in glimmering curtains. That's Willow Draw, Jacob said, pointing with his chin toward a fold in the land where a creek ran bright even under the cloud. The ranch sits where the draw opens. Good wind, enough shelter. Work all day and sleep honestly. He named it all without ceremony, the way a man might name the bones in his own hand. At the ridge the rain thinned to mist, and the wind shouldered the wagon with playful shoves. Jacob pushed back his hat, and breathed as if the air here fit him. Maria, thinking of doors that close and rooms that hold warmth, pressed the blanket edges tighter under her arms and watched the road unspool toward a cluster of buildings that took shape from the gray. Fences were mended, gates hung square. A windmill turned with a complaint that sounded more like a habit than a flaw. A long low barn shouldered the weather, and beyond it a white house held its paint against the season as if refusing to become shabby. A man stood by the corral with a coil of rope in his hand, lean and rangy, hat tipped back, grin already forming because he had seen the wagon from a distance and guessed the errand. "That's Tom Brody," Jacob said. "He runs the men and keeps the place honest when I'm pulled too many ways." Tom walked up as the wagon stopped. He didn't stare at Maria's face or let his eyes crawl over her like she was a new tool. He touched 2 fingers to his brim and said ma'am, as if the word cost him nothing and meant plenty. "Welcome to Willow Draw." The welcome landed in her chest like a small, careful weight. Not a chain, not a stone, something she might build on. Jacob handed Tom the reins, then helped Maria down the way he had helped her up. Brief, practical, respectful. "We'll put your things in the house," he said. "Kitchen's at the back. I'll show you the stove, the pantry and the pump." Lila and Emma are with Mrs. Parson from next homestead, learning their letters out of the rain. They'll be home by noon. Inside the house, the floors had been swept that morning and might be swept again that afternoon, not because a spill or mess demanded it, but because order pleased the eyes and settled the mind. The table had nicks where knives had lived, but no rings of neglect. A row of pegs held coats sized for a man and 2 small girls. The stove sat like a black heart that had known both winter and soup. Jacob showed her the shelves, the jars with labels in a tidy hand, the bread box lined with a clean cloth. "You'll have your own room," he said, as if rooms were not a currency most people hoarded. He pushed open a narrow door off the back hall. The space held a bed with a quilt in simple blocks of faded blue and cream, a washstand with a pitcher, a small chest for clothes, and a window that faced the paddock so Dawn could find it without knocking. The air smelled of beeswax and rain. Maria set her bundle on the chest and touched the quilt with the backs of her fingers, as if the cloth might startle and fly. "If you need another blanket, say so," Jacob told her from the doorway. "If something breaks, we fix it. If the girls challenge you, call me. If Tom says something can't be done, try it twice and then ask why." The ghost of a smile touched his mouth and left. "Supper at 6 unless there's fire or flood." He tipped his hat and withdrew, leaving her with walls that neither leaned nor listened for a bell. She unwrapped the flour sack and slid her thin dresses into the chest, laid the book under the pillow like a square secret, and set the ribbon on the washstand, where its frayed edges looked less like poverty and more like history. Rain ticked on the window. The yard beyond held a steady rhythm of tasks. Tom's voice with the men, a horse snorting, a hammer finding nails without hunting. The order pressed against her like a new kind of weather. She closed the door, sat on the bed that did not sag, and folded her hands in her lap. Hope and fear rose together, equal, surprising, alive. She could feel both and still breathe. Morning pooled pale light over Willow Draw, brightening wet fences, and setting the windmill to a low hymn. Maria rose early, coaxed the stove alive, folded biscuit dough warm under her palms, and poured milk while coffee ticked. Emma arrived with a trailing blanket. Lila followed with lifted chin and tight braids. Maria slid plates forward, moved jam closer when Emma missed, and set honey by Lila's elbow without comment. After breakfast, the girls laced their boots. Emma fought a stubborn loop until Maria showed a spoon trick. Lila said she knew it already. Maria walked them to the gate for lessons at Mrs. Parsons'. Emma chattered about drawing mountains. Lila retied a braid that did not need fixing, and asked when their father would return. "This afternoon," Maria said, and watched them go. Back in the kitchen, she learned the stove's draft, lined up potatoes, scrubbed the porch until resin rose, and listened to a thin rain soften the yard. At noon, Jacob brought a written list that matched what she had done, and told her to add whatever the house asked for, because houses speak if you listen. His words landed with steady weight. She mended Lila's sleeve, fixed Emma's doll ear, and reinforced a seam on Jacob's shirt. When the girls tumbled in, cheeks wined bright, Maria set warm milk and sugared apple slices on the table. Emma ate with delight. Lila said she disliked sweetness and ate half. Folding laundry turned playful. Emma tried to snap a sheet like Tom snapped a rope. Cloth fell over her face, and she laughed from inside the ghost. Lila aligned corners until they pleased her, then adjusted one of Maria's edges by a thread. Maria thanked her. Evening carried in Jacob with wind in his coat seam. He washed at the pump, ate stew in grateful quiet, and stitched leather by the fire while Maria read a primer story. Emma leaned against her side. Lila watched the flames and listened without saying so. Later, Emma cried out, caught in a night. Maria set a lantern down, spoke softly about river stones that keep summer heat under a pillow, warmed a small rock and tucked it near tiny hands. Emma's breath slowed. Lila whispered that their mother used to sing. Maria admitted she could only hum and did so, a cedar smoke tune that soothed the dark. From the doorway Lila murmured, "Thank you," in a voice trying not to need. Morning brought errands. Tom needed nails, Jacob needed salt, the house needed soap, the girls needed slates. Maria wanted thread. They rolled into town along a street stitched by wagon tracks. Inside the mercantile, a tall rancher with polished boots bought tobacco and turned with a smirk that did not reach his eyes. Victor Slade said Jacob's new helper cooked with smoke and carried blood fit only for campfire tale. Maria kept her gaze on the spool case. Jacob said the only story that counted was work done fairly, and people treated as people. Slade laughed and asked whether the girl danced in circles. Maria stayed steady, hands folded. Jacob put his receipt away and said last night's stew had been excellent, and any man insulting a member of his household could take his business elsewhere before the day soured. Tom's quiet shape behind him made a second fence. Slade tipped his hat without warmth and stepped aside. The clerk slid the thread and added 2 needles without comment. Outside, the wind carried the mineral scent of rain. Jacob asked if she wished to walk. They crossed the square where cottonwoods combed the sky. Emma chased a hoop. Lila tried not to laugh and did. Maria said she did not want trouble. Jacob answered that trouble had wanted them already, and they had declined though heat might return and would be handled with water, patience and if needed a wall. Back at the ranch, Maria browned venison with onions, baked cornbread crisp at the edge, and let the girls stir. Emma learned to test with a straw. Lila wiped the counter without being asked, and pretended she had not. After supper, Emma begged for a tale. Maria told one about a fox that learned to listen to snow. Lila said foxes ate hens. Maria agreed that hunger could be sharp and added that listening saved more lives than teeth. Jacob's glance warmed and worried her because attention can shelter or weigh. She stepped onto the porch, mist brushed her cheeks, barn boards creaked, a distant coyote stitched sound through wet grass. She breathed earth, iron and sage. Have you ever felt like an outsider, yet kept going? She carried the question quietly. Emma woke again near midnight. Maria sat at once, named anchors in a calm rhythm that untied shadows: window, rain, quilt, pillow, breath. She coached 5 slow inhales, and 5 long exhales. Lila held the lantern. Emma's fingers softened around Maria's own and sleep returned. Lila said shapes on the wall frightened her. Maria answered that shadows obey light, and they could make more light together. Lila studied her as if testing a bridge, and nodded once. Days formed a pattern while trust followed its own calendar. Emma began leaving drawings on the washstand. Lila asked practical questions about spice, soap or hem length, then listened as if measuring a future she meant to sow herself. On Sunday the clouds tore open and left the world rinsed. Jacob took them to the creek where trout held steady in green water. Emma slipped and laughed when Jacob swung her upright. Lila did not slip and laughed only when a frog bumped her boot. Maria felt a new thing forming, not safety and not longing, but room enough to hold both girls without losing herself. On the walk back, Jacob said Slade owned money, fences and a habit of wanting other people's lines. He said they would keep watch. Maria said watching was something she understood. He said he could tell. During a hard rain the wind pressed the house and the chimney made a low throat. Maria stirred soup, checked latches and moved through rooms that now recognized her steps. She found rhythm: sweep, warm, mend, teach, listen, rest. She corrected Emma's letters, praised a new S, and handed Lila a needle and thread for a first tidy ladder of stitching. Emma dragged a chair and inhaled cinnamon. Lila set plates and straightened a knife by a hair. Maria thanked her again. Rain drummed and turned the yard into silver squares. The windmill clicked like a slow clock. Tom crossed the yard, raised 2 fingers and vanished into the barn. Jacob checked shutters and returned to the fire with damp on his coat and that quiet that never hid anything. Maria served bowls and watched steam twist and let go. She served Jacob last, so the girls had enough. He noticed and kept his gratitude inside plain silence. In her small room she set her grandmother's ribbon on the washstand and looked through the window at the paddock where the gelding breathed fog. An owl called from the cottonwoods, another answered beyond the draw. Maria counted the day in calm measure: food cooked, tears calmed, insult deflected, girls steadied, lines held. Growth always carries unease, she thought. Yet the feeling did not push her away. She let hope and caution share the same chair. The house settled and accepted her way. Beyond the glass, the rain tapered then ceased. In the hush the place felt alive with low purpose. And belonging seemed to begin like this. Not with a shout, but with rooms breathing in time with your own. Steam curled, and talk found its level again. Thunder walked the horizon all morning, a slow drum behind gray light, and the ranch adjusted its pace, while Maria braided Lila's hair and tucked a red thread at the nape to tame loose wisps. Maria threaded a needle and showed Lila how to anchor knots, hide stitches and breathe between passes so the cloth did not pucker. Emma chose a blue button for her doll, and held it like treasure. Rain advanced in a fine curtain. Maria set water to boil, placed herbs to steep, and began a story her grandmother had told by firelight. About a girl who learned the language of rivers by listening until stones shared old songs. Lila pretended not to listen, yet her hands stilled. Emma asked whether stones talk to birds. Maria said stones talk to anyone who listens without rushing. Then tied a cedar and mint sachet for Emma's pillow. "What stories shape who you are?" she asked. And the room tilted toward the question. Wind thickened and brought the first hard drops. Tom jogged past the kitchen window. Jacob rode by on the bay, shoulders squared against the weather. Maria salted broth, diced potatoes for quick cooking, and set bread to rise by the stove where the heat breathed steadily. The girls practiced sums while lightning stitched bright seams across the walls and thunder rolled like barrels. Lila miscopied a number, scowled and erased until the slate turned pale. Maria slid a second slate across and said mistakes do not break the world. She told another tale, about a woman who mended nets with patience so boats returned after every gale. Emma curled against her side and breathed warm trust. Dusk found Jacob soaked to the elbows and quiet with worry. He asked whether the south stall roof still held. Tom answered yes and vanished toward the forge. Maria ladled stew and watched steam soften Jacob's face. He thanked her without ceremony. Ate, listened to recitations, then sent Lila to test a pantry latch he had seen loose. Lila returned with satisfaction and received a small nod that weighed more than praise. The storm climbed closer. Heat left the air, and a sharp edge found the wind. Emma coughed, said she felt fine, and asked for another story. Maria gave a short one and settled both girls early with warm socks and a heavy quilt across their feet. An hour later Emma woke flushed and glassy, breath quick and shallow. Maria felt forehead, throat and wrist, counted a skittering pulse and called softly for Jake. He arrived with boots half-laced and eyes that measured the room as if a gate had blown open. Maria said she would stay the night. He fetched water and wood. Thunder pressed the house. Rain lashed the window. Maria brewed willow bark tea, shaved ginger thinly, and mixed a cool cloth with vinegar and mint. She told Lila that fever is a battle the body can win if the room stays calm and voices stay quiet. Lila wanted to help. Maria handed a mortar and asked her to crush dried elderberries until they smelled like summer earth, then to hold Emma's hand and count breaths. Emma whimpered. Maria hummed the river song and told the story again, slower, letting each word fall like water over stone. She sponged brow and wrists, set the cloth at the nape where heat gathered, and eased the pillow to open the throat. Jacob set a kettle by the fire and asked what else she needed. She said time, quiet, and trust. He gave all three. Hours turned like slow wheel. Lightning climbed the cottonwoods and unstitched the sky. Inside breaths counted a path through the dark. Lila dozed and woke, and dozed again, stubborn as a small soldier. The fever crested, held then climbed. Maria refused to panic and worked each step she knew. She measured sips between coughs, wiped sweat while speaking comfort, changed clothes before they cooled, and put a warmed stone at Emma's feet to draw heat downward. Near midnight, thunder rolled close. Jacob stood in the doorway with stillness that felt like strength, not hesitation. He watched Maria's hands listen before they moved. He watched Lila watch Maria and saw something uncurl in his eldest that had stayed tight since the law. When Emma's breathing hitched, Maria shifted the pillow, changed her angle, and stroked her back in a pattern that calmed hiccups when Lila was small. Jacob recognized the motion and felt the locked door in his chest ease on its hinges. He stepped in and offered his palm. Emma pressed small fingers to it and let fear travel out, not as a burden but as a bridge. Rain softened near 2. The mantel clock marked minutes with tired courage. Maria whispered that the fever often breaks at dawn, set a bowl to catch clean water and kept the cloth cool. Lila asked whether the river girl had ever been afraid. Maria said yes. Courage is not a sword but a lamp someone tends. Toward morning Emma's skin cooled by a whisper. Light brightened from iron to pewter. Maria brewed thin broth and fed 3 spoons. Then 3 more, slow as good promise. Lila smiled with her whole face and fell asleep at the foot of the bed, hand on her sister's ankle. Jacob whispered thanks. The word small and plain and heavy. He said he had seen strength that lifts beams and strength that holds children, and he honored both. Maria nodded once and kept working because the job was not done. The storm limped away through the draws muttering. Tom's voice carried across the yard in a low call to a hungry bay. Maria opened the window a finger and let the chill air smooth the room. She washed the basin, wrung the cloth and turned to find Jacob still there as if leaving would insult the vigil. He asked what herbs she had used. She told him willow bark, mint, elderberry, a sliver of ginger and the old story of stones, because belief can steady hands when nothing else does. He said he would help gather more when the weather cleared, that the girls would need sleep and that she would too. She said she would rest when Emma's cheeks held color. He almost smiled then did, a brief promise of later. By afternoon Emma drew a sun with crooked rays while Lila corrected the number of points like a magistrate revising a decree. Maria carried linens to the line between showers and came back damp and laughing, surprised by the sound of her own lightness. She told about salmon that returned to a river they smelled once, and a grandmother who could find springs with a willow switch. Lila asked whether such switches knew the names of clouds. Maria said they knew the shapes of thirst. Jacob heard that answer and kept it. He watched Maria bind a braid with a strip of cloth and tuck a quilt so it hugged a sleeping child without trapping air. He watched her speak to the house the way a careful hand speaks to a fretful horse. The stern edge at his mouth softened like wet leather, turning workable. At supper he said grace and included thanks for steady hands and old knowledge that still served. He did not say her name and did not need to. The girls ate with quiet happiness. Tom took seconds and grinned at Emma's drawing displayed like a church window. After the dishes Maria stepped onto the porch. The cottonwoods shook off lingering drops and a late peal rolled from beyond the ridge like a judge's last word. She let the sound pass through and counted the quiet afterward as if it were a harvest. The sky opened rib by rib to a patient blue. The land smelled of wet clay and crushed sage. She felt the ache of wakefulness and the buoyancy of a night endured together, a thread woven between people who had once been only names and tasks. She thought of her grandmother's voice of medicine disguised as wonder, and understood that care, tale, herb and patience belong to one practice, keeping life inside the circle when weather tries to blow it out. She closed the door on the wind and returned to the room where Emma slept and Lila dreamed of numbers that behaved. Jacob rose to offer his chair without thinking about debt. He said the ranch owed her, then corrected himself and said he owed her, which was different. She said no one owed anything. This was the work a house asks of its people. He accepted the correction and looked at his daughters with a new peace. Evening gathered its tools. Lamps warmed. Outside, puddles kept bits of sky like saved coins. Inside the fire spoke in comfortable crack. When she woke Emma's cheek was cool. She breathed thanks to anyone listening. The storm had left and something else had arrived. Not loud or showy, just trust in finding a chair and staying. Trust had Emma ran toward carved pumpkins with a squeal. Lila followed with measured steps, checking for mud, then allowed the day to carry her. Maria set bread on the baked goods table, straightened a price card, and nodded to Mrs. Parson, who had pies ranked like soldiers. Jacob stacked wood for the bonfire, and checked the horse line with Tom, both men moving with the ease of people who fix problems before they break. Neighbors drifted past, some friendly, some curious, some pretending not to stare at the girl helping the widower from Willow Draw. Maria kept her shoulders level, gave exact change, and let warmth sit over the whispers like a quilt over cold boards. Lila arranged napkins square. Emma returned with a ribbon from the sack race and asked whether chickens danced when lanterns lit the world. Maria said chickens saved their dancing for dawn and tied the ribbon on Emma's hat so it bounced with each step. Near noon, Victor Slade arrived with 2 men in sharp coats and boots that shone like answers nobody asked for. He remarked that smoke clings to bread when stories are stirred into batter, that superstition ruins yeast, and that some homes punish daughters for cause, each phrase tossed lightly yet honed for harm. Color burned Maria's cheeks, but her posture did not bend. Miss Parsons' mouth thinned. Tom moved closer, Jacob stepped forward, set a coin for another lemonade, and said the first had been excellent, and the woman insulted had kept his girls fed through fever while losing sleep that would have crushed a weaker back. He did not raise his tone, he drew a line and left it standing. Slade lifted his hands and called it humor, tipped his hat without sincerity, and strolled away trailing borrowed laughter. Noise returned like wind after a lull, and the square remembered joy. Emma tugged Maria toward pumpkins. Lila asked whether the pie contest needed a judge who liked arithmetic. Mrs. Parson declared it did. By afternoon the square glittered with jars, quilts and meat platters, a line formed for the greased pole, children wove between knees like quick fish. Maria tasted pies, kept neat notes and returned a wink when Emma tried to bribe the jury with an extra slice of apple. Lila sold raffle tickets with tidy penmanship, and guarded the jar as if it held gold. Jacob fixed a loose strap on the wagon with an economy that looked like grace under plain clothes. Slade drifted through the booths again, dropping remarks that slid like pins yet found fewer seams willing to take them after Jacob's boundary. Late light spread honey across the street. Shadows lengthened, the sky darkened at the rim as if another storm remembered the way back. The band loosed a reel, dust lifted, laughter met it. They began awkward, heel uncertain, booed a hair slow, then found a cadence that pleased the ground. Emma clapped out of time without caring. Lila looked with all her attention while pretending not to, one corner of her mouth lifting anyway. On the second tune, Jacob leaned close and said to fix her gaze beyond his shoulder, breathe through the turn, and trust that panic teaches the wrong lesson. She tried, felt breath guide her feet, and discovered the turn answering her instead of pushing her aside. She laughed, a quiet release that belonged to open air and asked no permission. Lanterns brightened as dusk gathered. The square turned warm and flickering like a held hearth. Jacob's sternness softened without losing its core. Have you ever stood where gossip gathers and chosen not to bend even while your heart rattled like a gate in the wind? How would you stand tall against judgment? Maria carried that question like a coin she refused to spend. Near the horse line, a raised voice cut the tune. Slade had cornered a hired boy and waved a loosened girth strap like proof of sabotage. The boy stammered. People drifted closer with the greedy stillness of a crowd hungry for spectacle. Jacob let Maria's hand go and walked through without hurry, Tom falling in beside him. He told Slade that tack complaints travel to the foreman and never through a child, then examined the strap and said the tongue hole showed old stretch, not fresh error. Tom added that he had checked the string at noon and would swear to it before any elder present. Parson raised her chin, said she had heard the same and declared the matter closed. Slade smiled with too many teeth and stepped back as if indulging quaint habit. Music reclaimed the air, applause scattered like rain on tin, the circle opened and folks returned to dancing, talking, buying and eating. Jacob returned with an almost shy glance that asked whether the dance still wanted them. Maria answered by lifting her palm. They finished the set with the humility of people who know grace depends on listening rather than flash. When the tune paused, Lila approached and adjusted Maria's sleeve by a breath. A gesture that had once meant critique and now felt like care. Learning a new language, Emma presented a chain of paper stars and said they were for the kitchen window so breakfast would remember tonight. Maria promised the window would shine. Night settled until lanterns did more than decorate. They held back the dark while wind hummed across lines and pennants like a friendly saw. Beyond the rooftops, distant lightning flickered inside a long bank of cloud like a thought not yet spoken, while stubble fields glowed faintly under a young moon. Maria sat with the girls on a quilt while Jacob fetched coke. She told a Creek story about a woman who could hear snow arriving before the first flake because trees warned anyone who learned their grammar. Emma asked whether trees warned about bullies. Lila listened without pretending not to. Maria said trees warn about wind, ice and flame, and people warn about cruelty by standing together until cruelty loses appetite. Later the wagon loaded under the moon, jars chimed, quilts folded, the ribbon prize rode high on the tailboard like a small flag. The road home ran like a dark ribbon across hayshocks and shallow pools that mirrored stars. A coyote called from the draw. The windmill at Willow Draw answered with a slow creak as they rolled in. Tom rode the fence once for luck and lifted a hand shaped like good night. Jacob carried Emma to bed, pointed Lila toward sleep, and stood in Maria's doorway longer than custom, as if listening for weather inside to match the calm beyond. Clouds brushed the moon and let the ranch slip into soft dark. Maria set the stars on her window frame, smoothed her quilt and sat on the bed that did not sag. She let the day replay the insult she refused to swallow. The line Jacob drew without heat, the dance that found balance, the sisters' signs of trust, the town choosing fellowship over spectacle, the road unrolling under a sky lit by distant storm. Midnight lay over Willow Draw like wet velvet when a wrong wind lifted from the south, acrid and sharp, and Maria woke before the crackle sorted itself from dreams. She left bed, caught her shawl and opened the window to a smear of orange behind the cottonwoods. A breath later, the bell Tom rigged under the porch rafters clanged like judgment. She ran barefoot down the hall, tapped the girl's door and gave firm instructions. Turned practical. Boots, coats, out to the yard, wait by the pump with blankets. Lila nodded, gathering Emma and the doll with its blue button ear. Maria snatched a bucket, flew through the kitchen, and burst into a night that had changed color. The barn glowed at the eaves. Smoke dragged low across the pens, thick and oily. Tom sprinted with a hook pole. Jacob came from the house, pulling suspenders over his shoulders, voice already cutting through rising panic. Wind shoved sparks across dry stubble. A horse kicked a stall and screamed like metal torn. Maria tasted ash and copper and did not hesitate. She yanked the barn door, felt heat slap her face and went in. Flames licked rafters. Cattle were shoved into their pen. Hay hissed toward the open fire. She soaked her shawl at the trough, bound it over nose and mouth and moved stall to stall, sliding bolts with hands that knew every latch. Jacob appeared through roiling gray with a wet coat thrown over his head, shouldered the feedroom door and shoved out a spooked gelding. Tom cut a halter and slapped the horse toward open ground. Maria reached the bay Emma favored, found him battering wood and spoke his name the way a true name steadies fear. The eye fixed. She slipped the latch, pressed her shoulder to his neck, and urged him sideways. Heat climbed, timbers popped. She smelled lamp oil along a beam and understood malice. A joist broke, dropping sparks across straw. Jacob met her at the door, took the lead, and together they dragged the bay into the yard where cold air cut like clean knives. Behind them, the interior roared. Maria gave Lila the rope and told her to walk a circle, keep him moving, and talk steadily. Lila obeyed, pale and fierce. Buckets flew hand to hand from the pump. Jacob vanished inside again, re-emerged with 2 sheep, then plunged back after a yearling pounding the far stall. Maria followed before sense could argue. She crawled under smoke, pried a splintered plank with a broken rake, freed the yearling, and shoved it toward daylight as flame coughed from the loft. At the threshold, a gust rolled fire over their heads like a red wave. They stumbled out half-blind, wholly alive. Wind hauled sparks toward the chicken run. Men beat embers with wet sacks. Mrs. Parsons swept the girls beneath her shawl and counted them twice. In the chaotic light, Maria saw, past the far fence, a rider paused on the rise, collar up, brim low, horse stamping at blown cinders. A lick of lightning in distant cloud mirrored flame and showed the arrogant tilt. Victor Slade sat his mount and measured ruin, then turned away and slid down the far side of the ridge. Maria swallowed rage so it would not waste her breath. She grabbed a shovel and cut a firebreak near the haystack while Tom poured a wet line to guard the oats. Rain began to spit. Mercy late but real at last. The loft blew out, bales fell like comets and the roof sagged with a crack. Jacob stepped between falling cinders and his daughter. Maria shoved him toward cover as a beam crashed, and they both laughed once. Sharp and wild at the foolishness of trying to out stubborn fire, they worked until the work allowed no more. Dawn bled into smoke, a color made of ash and milk. What stood of the barn steamed like a beast cooling after a fight it nearly won. The bay tossed his head and settled when Lila whispered into his ear. Tom counted heads and made a fast slate of what lived and what the blaze ate. Tools warped, tack burned, grain ruined, loft gone, west wall broken. Jacob looked at the wreck with a face carrying resolve and grief. Maria stepped beside him and said the words before doubt could sour them. "This is my home." Her voice did not shake. Emma heard and gripped her skirt. Lila did not look away. Jacob closed his eyes for a breath, opened them, and said they would rebuild beam by beam, and no man who played with fire would find purchase here. Mrs. Parson pressed a jar into Maria's hands and told her to sit. She ignored it until Emma's cough insisted. She washed the child's face, checked for singe, and whispered the tale about stones keeping heat under water when snow returns. Emma breathed easier. Lila hovered with a pail and laughed when the bay smeared soot on her sleeve. Tom reported tracks near the fence where no neighbor had reason to ride, plus a cut wire and a scorch line that did not match falling cinder. Jacob nodded, a motion that meant suspicion had hardened. He said the law slept when money sang, so they would build evidence like a wall. Maria asked what came first. Jacob answered, safety for the girls, a plan for animals and a list for timber. Then he looked at her, wreckage painting his face in harsh strokes, and something unguarded open. I need you, he said, not only for their sake, not only for meals, not only for that quiet that steadies children at 2 in the morning, but for the way you stand when wolves circle and for the way this place breathes easier when you move through it. I need you for myself. The words hung between smoke and new light. Emma watched with sleepy interest. Lila pretended to study the bay's mane and did not hide her pleased mouth. Maria did not decorate the moment. She said she needed this work, these walls, these 2 girls ready to meet the weather, and this man who spoke like a plow cutting straight furrows. She said again that this was her home and added that home is not boards but the hands that lift them. Jacob bowed his head as if before a blessing. Behind the cottonwoods a thin line of sun found the draw. Rain thickened into a wash that hissed over coals and smoothed the yard. The girls, soot-cheeked and stubborn, started saving nails from ash and turned salvage into a game. The bay stood calm, breath white in the cool, as if vowing loyalty in a language horses know. Maria tied her hair with the old ribbon and faced the black ribs of the barn the way a fighter faces a second round. From the ridge where the watcher had sat, only wet grass remained, but tracks had written a name in mud clear enough for any honest eye. Jacob met Maria's look. They did not shake hands like merchants, or embrace like a romance pressed too soon. They stood together, ash on clothes, rain in hair, steadying their answer to ruin, and let the morning find them still here. Dawn climbed over Willow Draw, and found the barn reduced to ribs, blackened posts, angled like broken fingers against a rinsed sky. Steam rose in torn veils where coals still remembered heat. The house stood dark with smoke stains along the eaves. Yet windows held, doors swung and the stove breathed again. Horses stamped in the corral, anxious yet alive. Chickens murmured from a temporary crate. The bay Emma loved nosed Lila's sleeve until she giggled despite soot on her cheeks. Maria walked the yard marking damage as if reading a harsh ledger, then thanked the ground for sparing children, kitchen, well and a tether of feed. Jacob and Tom dragged the last hot bales into a wet pit, and turned them with forks until sullen glows surrendered. The smell carried every mile of the night: wet ash, scorched resin, singed rope, sour grain and a faint lick of kerosene near the broken west wall that told its own ugly story. By mid-morning neighbors arrived along rutted lanes with blankets, boards, spare nails and the kind of looks that hide measurements. Mrs. Parson brought coffee strong enough to lift a man and pressed warm cups into tired hands. Old Mr. White unloaded a stack of planks and said he remembered fires before men learned not to stack lamp oil where sparks could start. 2 ranchers from the far ridge offered a day on the new frame without asking for trade, then patted the bay and left a sack of oats. Others came with questions too careful to be kind. Someone muttered that storms make honest trouble and misfortune follows people who carry strange songs. Someone else whispered Maria's name with a tone that pretended pity while gathering gossip like kindling. She kept her face steady and kept moving because movement prevents smoke from taking the lungs completely. Jacob waved off the ugliest remarks by focusing on lists and measurements. Tom strung a line across the cleared footprint and marked posts with blue chalk. Lila carried salvaged nails in a tin and counted like a clerk. Emma stuck labels on jars and invented a game where every saved hinge earned the house another sunrise. Maria sorted usable planks, set aside warped boards for kindling, washed bridles that could be rescued, and cleaned singe from bits with soda and patience. When she reached for a bucket, Jacob reached too, their fingers tangled, a quick, messy clasp, then separating. He apologized softly for not stopping the flames sooner. She said sorrow wastes hands and today requires hands. He nodded, placed the bucket beside her and held it while she scrubbed a strap that would live to serve again. Midday rain returned, thin but loyal, smearing soot into gray rivulets that drew maps across their wrists. Maria brought a basin to the porch and scrubbed Emma's face, then held Lila's chin while dabbing a scratch earned during rescue. The girl accepted the sting without bravado. Family, she said, surprised at her own word as it stepped out. Maria stilled, met the brave eyes and answered yes without decoration. Lila gave a firm nod and hurried back to her careful stacks. Inside, the kitchen gathered people the way safe rooms do after trouble. Cups clinked, boots dripped, spoons stirred, Maria ladled stew into bowls and kept portions even, saving the last for Jacob only after the girls and Tom had enough. He noticed and thanked her through work rather than speeches, taking a hammer the way some men take vows. After the quick meal they chalked out a plan on the table. Tom would lead a crew to raise new beams tomorrow if the weather allowed. Jacob and Maria would inventory losses that required town orders, timber lengths, cut nails by size, shingles, rope, kerosene lanterns for safe storage and fresh canvas to shield hay. Maria added herbs, salves and clean bandages to the bottom of the page with the plain confidence of someone who has seen nights stretch long. In the afternoon the whispers returned like flies after the heat. A young drover asked too loudly whether Jacob meant to keep a girl with river songs under his roof when river luck had clearly turned. Jacob did not answer the boy. He spoke to the drover's employer instead, requested the far wagon park beyond the cottonwoods where sparks would miss, and returned to the chalk lines like a man watering a field rather than arguing about rain. Mrs. Parson shut the door on two visitors who came with questions and no tool. Maria heard their laughter drift away and felt anger burn a small clean flame, the kind that cauterizes rather than destroys. Evening brought calmer air, though the smell of smoke hung under every breath. They washed by the pump while light thinned to pewter. Maria worked a bar of lye across Jacob's hands, turning black water to gray and then to something almost clear. She scrubbed. He held still, and a quiet formed that belonged only to people who have carried buckets together through a night that tried to break them. When she finished, he turned the cloth and cleaned soot from her palms, slow and careful as if residue might hide a splinter he could remove with attention alone. The girls watched from the porch steps, whispering judgments. Emma was awarded points for neatness, Lila for steadiness. Tom coughed a laugh and fled to the corral so teasing could do its work. They spent the last of the light salvaging bricks from a collapsed corner to rebuild a hearth for warming mash. Owls called from cottonwoods still damp at the root. Across the draw coyotes stitched a thin thread of sound and then let it fall. Before sleep, Jacob walked the fence and found prints where the watcher had sat. Rain had blurred edges, yet heel and toe still spoke the name already scratched into mud. He traced them with his lamp in a cold arc, and returned to the house with patience coiled like a rope he planned to throw only once. Morning rebuilt resolve. The girls ate griddle cakes made from the last of the good flour and argued cheerfully about syrup. Maria packed a basket for the town and wrapped a roll of measurements like a small flag. She and Jacob rode in on the bay and a borrowed mare while Tom stayed behind to welcome a framing crew. Clouds massed to the west, a long bruised line above golden field. Wind combed wheat stubble into waves that flashed pale, then dark. At the mercantile, prices tried to climb under the pressure of bad luck, but the clerk looked at Jacob's list, looked at Maria's steady eyes and trimmed totals the way a decent man trims kindling to help a neighbor's fire start right. Two boys from the back loaded timber, nails, tar and lanterns. Maria added needles, salve tins and a jar of menthol for a smoke cough. On the porch, Victor Slade leaned against a post, smiling as if daylight answered to his He praised the rebuilding spirit while implying that some houses draw lightning better than others. Jacob listened without granting audience, said nothing, and led the horses away. Maria felt the urge to answer and mastered it because some victories grow from appetite denied. The ride home passed through wheat like coin, past purple thistles heavy with bees, under hawks surfing the stalled wind. Rain threatened but did not fall. Back at the ranch, men from 3 spreads lifted timbers in a chorus of grunts and brief jokes. Pegs tapped home, a mallet thudded like a dependable drum. Lila handed pegs as if serving communion. Emma brought water with each arm, determined to prove strong. Maria steadied the ladder while Jacob wrestled a brace into place, shoulders straining under honest weight. The new structure creaked as it learned to stand. By sundown the skeleton of a roof crossed the sky in patient lines. Everyone ate together on planks laid over sawhorse. Maria passed bowls, bandaged a scraped knuckle and tucked a wool square around Emma's knees when chill crept in. Neighbors left with waves and brief words. Some squeezed Maria's hand, others studied her profile as if hunting evidence for a story already written. She let their looks fall away and kept hold of the girls. After the dishes the 4 of them sat on the porch where the night smelled like damp lumber and soot fading toward ordinary dust. Jacob leaned back, tired enough to tell truths without worrying about posture. He said he kept thinking of how she pulled the bay through the smoke while laughing at him for ducking too slowly. She said laughter had kept fear from stealing breath. He said tomorrow would bring more beams, more work, and likely more whisper. She said work would answer the beams and patience would answer the whispers. Lila slid closer, laid her head against Maria's shoulder and announced that teams share weather. Emma tucked her hand inside Maria's and fell asleep, before the sentence finished. The house creaked like an old friend shifting in a chair. Out near the fence, a fox trotted with bright purpose. The new frame stood against a dark sky, strong lines rising from burned earth, smelling of sap and hope. The threat remained, an echo on the ridge that would require watching, but Hope stood up too, wearing calluses and a clean shirt, ready to work until dawn. They sat longer, sharing a tin mug of tea with smoke and mint, letting the day cool their pulse. Maria washed a last smear from Jacob's thumb with a rag warmed on the rail, then folded the cloth and kept it as proof that ruin can be met with care. Lila woke long enough to whisper that tomorrow the frame would sing when the mallet found rhythm. Jacob said the song already lived. A wind rolled out of the draw smelling of damp sage. Beyond the ridge, a single rider's spark winked, then vanished, leaving night and the steady breathing of a place that refused to yield. They went inside together, carrying weariness and a rising durable hope for them. Morning lifted gold over Willow Draw, turning the new barn frame into bright ribs against a rinsed sky, while swallows stitched quick arcs above the cottonwoods, and Maria stood with Lila and Emma on the porch, breathing sap and damp earth instead of ash, a scent that felt like a promise. Jacob came from the corral with mud on his laces, set a coil of rope down as if laying aside worry, and asked whether the house had slept. She asked whether the bay had eaten. The ordinary exchange felt like a door opening into a long, steady day. He touched the brim of his hat, and asked if she would walk to the bend in the draw before the crew arrived. Emma announced that Riverstones liked mornings. Lila issued a solemn nod that somehow carried permission and pride. Tom lifted 2 fingers from the yard and pretended not to listen. They crossed wet grass where sunlight scattered like coins and stopped among reeds, whispering to clear water while cottonwood leaves made a low applause. Jacob spoke without polish, the way he did every true thing, saying he had rehearsed fine sentences and thrown them away because beams do not need paint to hold roofs. He took a small velvet pouch tied with a familiar frayed ribbon and said the ring inside had belonged to his wife's mother. He would be honored if Maria wore it, not as a replacement for anyone but as a mark that the house, the girls, and the man who fails softly in speech, yet tries hard with his hands would stand with her while she stood with them. She opened the pouch and found a river pebble set in simple silver, smooth as sleep, gray like the sky just before rain forgives the day. He removed his hat, held it over his heart and asked to marry her, promising to share dry matches, defend her against scorn, keep the kitchen bright when nightmares prowled and carry the girls until they asked to walk on their own fierce feet. Maria looked at the water, heard swallows write swift arguments above and thought of nights that had tried to take her from herself. She placed her palm to his jaw, felt stubble like stubborn grass, and said yes because belonging had entered her life as work, steadiness, listen, and laughter that arrived even when smoke stung her lungs. Yes because love here sounded like neighbors holding ladders while new boards rose. Yes because the girls had offered trust not in a rush but in steps taken together across wet ground. What does it mean to find where you belong? She wondered and understood that belonging is the quiet certainty that your hands recognize the handles they touch and your name settles into rooms without echo. He slid the ring onto her finger and the metal felt cool, then warm as the day accepted the news. They walked back without hurrying, trading future plans that feed mornings, finish the roof by Sunday if the weather allows, paint before frost, plant beans along the fence, teach Emma to braid rain, help Lila wrestle long division until numbers bow, set a bench under the cottonwoods where old stories could sit and breathe. The crew greeted them with guesses and grins that pretended not to celebrate until Tom failed at pretense, whooped once and declared the place would need a larger table. News ran ahead of wagons. Mrs. Parson arrived with cinnamon buns and a folded church notice. Old Mr. White slapped Jacob's back and told Maria she had improved the bloodline of the valley by agreeing to suffer the most stubborn man he had ever liked. Whispers stirred, thinner than before like smoke that had lost its appetite. On Sunday the bell sent a silver sound across the square as clouds stacked like mountains above the true mountains. The chapel smelled of lemon oil, hymn books, and meadow dust. Maria wore a borrowed dress let down and hemmed by Lila's neat hands. Jacob wore the suit that had held earlier vows, pressed by Tom with unnecessary ceremony and obvious care. Emma carried asters as if leading a parade of seasons. The minister kept his words short, Speaking of shelters built on rock and love that does not shout yet does not withdraw. Tom lifted a tin cup at the small reception and toasted to all the Holts, blinking hard and blaming smoke that did not exist while the girls beamed like two small lanterns. Jacob took Maria's hands and promised the same things he had promised by the creek, only shorter, which made them stronger. Maria promised the same, only slower, which made them truer. They stepped into sunlight while bells leapfrogged clouds, and for a moment the town seemed remade by consent that needed no paper to make it real. Under the mercantile awning, Slade leaned like shade, pretending to be stone and watching the girls loop their arms through Maria's while Jacob rested his hand at her back in a gesture quiet as prayer. He murmured to a deputy who weighed the wind, saw 3 Ridge ranchers standing behind the family with post-hole digger certainty, and chose to do nothing. Slade slipped an unlit cigarette back into his pocket like a plan deferred and walked away with boots too loud for a sun. The sky broadened to a blue so open it tidied the heart. Back at Willow Draw, pie and a crooked dance filled the kitchen. Maria tied on an apron to cut slices. Jacob tried to untie it and failed because celebration still needed work. Both laughed as lanterns along the lee wall cast friendly shadows across new beams. Night fell like the last stitch on a quilt. Stars poured down. Hay sweetness rode the wind. After washing up they walked to the cottonwoods where the river kept its silver whisper. He said duty had outrun joy for years. She said duty and joy wear the same boots when people help them. He answered that luck matters less than choice repeated until it becomes faith. She answered that choice tastes like bread shared after work and faith tastes like clean water. The ring felt like a familiar tool in her grip. She kissed the mudline he had missed washing and scrubbed it away with a thumb because devotion likes practical habit. The girls called from the porch to witness the first lantern wink out. When it did, another took its place and the house did not darken because one small light had finished its turn. Weeks turned steady. Whispers trimmed themselves to market edge mud. The roof was finished. The walls learned shade. The new door thudded honest in its jamb. Lila bent long division to her will and guarded rows of jars as if they were ledgers. Emma learned a strong braid and declared herself Rain's captain on fair day. Jacob taught Maria the cadence of accounts. She taught him names of herbs he had walked past for years. They traded competence until ledger and medicine shelf shared one confidence. They rode to town for papers that pleased the clerk more than they needed pleasing. Still the stamp made Emma cheer, and small pleasures store winter when storms begin. Slade appeared at the far fence now and then like an ink blot that moves when you look away, but his hands never reached the yard again. The valley had seen what unity looked like and preferred it. Neighbors kept a habit of dropping by for coffee that tasted better than last year because resilience has flavor, and community can taste it. The bench under the cottonwoods took its place. Jacob carved a small horse on the armrest because craft at that scale turns pride into tenderness. Days found rhythm, dawn chores, noon laughter, evening soup, night prayers, the creak of beams settling into proper voice. Maria lay down and felt the household hold her instead of listening for steps that meant harm. She woke before swallows and met work like a friend. Freedom looked like Montana's wide sky accepting everything without crowding anything, sounded like the windmill turning a patient hymn, tasted like stew after rain that saved the north pasture. One pale afternoon after frost laced the pump and geese wrote long arrows south. The 4 of them stood at the rebuilt threshold watching the bay toss its head in cold brightness. Emma threaded her arm through Maria's and hummed the river song. Lila took Maria's other hand, wearing the grave look she saved for audits, and smiling without permission. Jacob looked at them all with that quiet astonishment men feel when walls stand and souls do too. Maria felt the 4 of them form a single shape weather could not erase, and thought again of the question that had followed her since the wagon arrived. What does it mean to find where you belong? And the answer rose as simply as bread. Work done with love, love done with patience, patience done with hope, hope done with hands that do not let go. They walked back to the house together while the big sky curved like a shelter built of light, and the wind said yes. The porch boards had darkened to honey with years of boots and small feet. Evening poured gold over Willow Draw, softening the hills like folded wool. Jacob sat on the bench. He carved long ago. The little horse on its arm rubbed smooth by thumbs. Maria settled beside him beneath a quilt, her creekstone ring catching the last light like a wet pebble. Chickens murmured near the lilacs. The windmill turned its patient hymn. Swallows stitched quick arcs above the cottonwoods, while the air held the comfort of cooling bread and cut meadow. Lila came up the path with a ledger tucked against her ribs, hair escaping its tie, laughter waiting behind a straight mouth. Emma followed with 2 cousins, dragging kites built from old catalogs and willow sticks. Grandchildren zigzagged, voices rising like larks, then falling when a hawk floated a slow circle. Tom climbed the steps with a fiddle, tuned a string, and let one sweet phrase drift before tucking the bow away out of respect for the hour. The ranch had grown but stayed human. New sheds stood square, fences held, a second well glinted, and a kitchen big enough for harvest crews breathed calm. A smokehouse made winter taste like gratitude. The valley remembered fire, drought, hail and late frost. But the family remembered something louder. Hands passing buckets, shoulders sharing weight, neighbors choosing to show up. Willow Draw had become a place that welcomed need without theater. Maria traced the carved ear of the wooden horse and remembered the night ash painted their faces and the morning laughter hid fatigue. While timbers rose, Lila taught numbers at the schoolhouse and still audited the pantry with pleasure, saving neat receipts like trophies. Emma painted creek stones for shy children, each bright oval named for the weather the valley kept. Hush rain, blue north, ember faded, gentle noon. Sons-in-law learned wire, gates and listening. Guests came for a season and stayed, not every year sang. They buried sorrows beneath cottonwoods, where the ground holds memory without gossip. Fever prowled and passed. One spring, the creek ran thin. Another year, it tried to take the north fence. Yet those chapters bent towards steadiness. Loss taught attention. Scarcity taught communion. Faith took the shape of kind work. On this golden evening, pie cooled on the sill and supper dishes dried on the rack. Jacob squeezed Maria's fingers as if testing whether the present was only a generous dream. We made something durable, he said. She answered that durability arrived because they chose again and again to hold rather than harden. He smiled with the quiet astonishment that first surprised her when soot still lived in their hair. She leaned her head on his shoulder and let the porch carry their combined weight. Children tumbled onto the steps and asked for the foxtail, then demanded the one about river stones that remember sunlight under snow. Maria told both, voice steady, cadence. She spoke of courage that does not shout, of rescue in rooms where lamps burn low, of doors that close and doors that open, of names that finally fit the mouths that say them. Emma supplied a missing line and laughed at herself. Lila added that numbers behave when the patient holds the charm. Grandchildren pressed closer until the quilt became a small hill of elbows and trust. When the stories ended, the younger ones ran to the corral to stroke the old gray gelding. Lila lingered and lay her cheek against Maria's hair. Family, she murmured, not as an announcement but as a settled truth. Years had emptied and refilled that word until it meant shelter, duty and delight braided together. They planned the week, mending the fence south of the draw, shingles for the line cabin, and volunteers for a church roof on Saturday. Jacob would take 2 grandsons to check salt licks. Maria would teach 3 cousins a seam that would outlast boots. Emma proposed painting a new lane sign. Tom pledged to teach a reel to anyone with more enthusiasm than rhythm. The porch collected plans like lanterns gathering dusk. A breeze carried the meadow's sweet cut, and with it, a memory of smoke that no longer hurt. Ridges turned purple, then blue, then almost black. Stars pricked through like little doors opening in the sky. The Milky Way unrolled a pale road guiding travelers home. Maria squeezed Jacob's hand and thought of the girl she once was, counting squeaks under a leaking roof, breathing through terror. That girl survived long enough to meet a man who spoke like a plow cutting straight furrows and a place that accepted work as fluently as prayer. She looked at Jacob and saw not the widower who once needed help, but the partner who made space for her strength, until it filled the house without pushing him aside. He saw not the frightened child who learned to cook and soothe and mend, but the leader whose calm held storms at the doorstep. Together they turned fear into stewardship, labor into ritual, silence into hospitality. The ranch thrived because they practiced days that looked small from a distance and large from within. At holidays the table stretched, chairs multiplied and grace lengthened to include absences by name. The old ribbon rested in a frame above the stove. The creek stone ring warmed after work. The bench beneath the cottonwoods held initials cut with guilty care and later softened by weather. Coyotes stitched a thin thread from coulee to coulee, then let it go. The windmill kept its hymn. Maria pressed her cheek to the back of Jacob's hand and felt the steady pulse that carried her through fire, rain and quiet triumphs. Inside, laughter flared over some small spill then softened into the easy music of dishes stacking. Emma stepped out with steaming mugs, kissed Maria's crown and slipped back in to negotiate bedtime with mock ferocity. Lila left a note on the rail that read, simply, all accounted for. Tom's fiddle finally spoke, a low tune tasting of cedar and memory. Across the road a rider paused at the far fence, hat brim low, horse shifting. For a breath the past tried to stand. Neighbors stepped from the granary's shadow with lamps, casual and watchful. The rider turned away. The valley closed ranks without speaking. Power stripped of secrecy, found nothing to grip. Old plots drained into dust. Grandchildren returned for good nights. Small fingers counted the creases in Maria's palm. A sleepy voice asked whether a person could belong to a place and to people at once. She said yes. That belonging loves both soil and hands, horizon and names. Another asked how you know. She said you know when your steps sound right on the boards and your breath matches the house at night. They stood at the rail while the hills caught starlight like cups. The quilts slipped to their ankles. He put his arm around her waist. She leaned in, the ring warming again as if it understood. Freedom looked like this. Montana's vast sky approving. Fields lying down without fear. A home that learned their hearts and held them gently. She had traveled from bruise to bloom, from silence to speech, from exile to embrace. He had traveled from duty to joy, from caution to ease, from holding on to holding with. The ranch prospered because they kept choosing. The children grew into kindness. The grandchildren trusted the dark because the house breathed steadily. The porch became a school for gratitude. Years counted by harvests and first frosts, folded into a single word both understood. Enough. The lantern hissed and settled. A calf called and found its mother. Somewhere a new story began with a wagon on a distant road. Here on boards dark as honey, two people sat down again to the life they chose, surrounded by kin, neighbors, songs and wells that did not run dry. Maria lifted her face to the stars and let thanks move through her without hurt. She spoke to the darkness like a friend and to the future like a guest already on the steps. The valley answered with the small sounds of a place at peace, the chorus she once dreamed of in a different house where dreams were hard to keep. She squeezed Jacob's hand and smiled. Maria found her place against all odds. What's your story of courage? Subscribe, share and join our community to discover more tales of triumph.